Hello and welcome. I'm Lyndon Walker and I hope you enjoy the video. Notice anything different today? We're doing a traditional piece, and there's my physical sketch that I made on the go, as you may very well know. I decided to keep a bit of my paint mixing in here just for funsies. I think it can be pretty nice to watch someone mixing paint every once in a while, even if I am just mixing red into more red to get more red. I'm a bit particular like that, I suppose, and it encourages me to stay aware of my paint consistency, but I can get more into that later. Oh, and for anyone wondering, at the moment I'm just using an angular flat brush. I think these are really good for getting into those nooks and crannies of a piece. However, unlike what I'm doing, you may want to get into the habit of mixing with a palette knife instead of your brush. I'm just a heathen and I didn't want to get up to go get one. But it is generally a good habit to have if you're using tubes as opposed to cakes, that is. That would be really difficult with cakes. Now, I've worked out some of the kinks with my camera. I feel like I've made good progress on that, and I have some parts for my tripod on the way, specifically some extensions that make it taller and to hold the camera out over the piece, as opposed to the stack of books I'm currently on. But if it works, it works. I'm also not in the sound dome anymore. I'm sitting at my desk like a normal person as I progressively get over my stage fright. Anyway, back to the painting at hand. You probably notice it is really small. That's because I tend to like to work to scale, and if you remember the title of this video, then you probably have already guessed that I'm designing a business card. Like most people, I'm having my bi-monthly identity crisis and figured, although I still have plenty of my other business cards left, because I haven't gone anywhere, that I'd freshen things up. I may also work on my logo at some point, but one step at a time here. I also want to note that, although I'm in a generally well-lit room, that did not seem to reflect in my camera's viewfinder, so I have the overhead light on as well as two lamps on either side of me, and I can hardly see what I'm doing at basically any part in this video. This is probably something that could be easily solved by either changing the light bulb in my desk lamp or getting a ring light, but the likelihood of me doing either of those things is low. When deciding on the colors to use in this piece, I immediately knew I wanted a bold red. It's one of my favorite colors to wear after black and very eye-catching, which is important when presenting yourself. Since the background is so vibrant, I wanted to keep the face more monochromatic, but I didn't want to use a pure black and white, so I added some blue, which I think helps add some dimension. When it comes to color, I tend to have either an explosion of colors or very muted colors. Like usual, there is no in between, but I suppose there's a variety at least, which I do want to reflect in my quote-unquote branding. I'm thinking I'd like to get some postcards when I order my business cards, but that means I also need to decide what to put on those as well. I can definitely choose some pre-existing artwork, which I may do, but I do like designing with a purpose. Something will happen. I'm just brainstorming at my own pace right now. There's no real hurry, but I do like to manage my time. Speaking of time, that reminds me of something I do far too often, including while I was working on this painting. Now, as I do, I listen to music while working most of the time, and as I recall, I was listening to Palais Royale this time around. But anyway, this whole bit didn't take very long for me to do, about 30 to 40 minutes if that, but for a good while I was just working in silence because I was so focused on painting I had forgotten to press play on my radio, but isn't that just the way? It's also that time of year where I am that it's finally starting to get a bit warmer out again. Because of that, I decided to bike to and from work the other day instead of catching the train, which was a mistake because it was very, very windy out, which didn't sound too bad until I was on my way home that evening, and the wind sent a branch or something flying into the power lines that sent a cascade of sparks and fire all over the road. It was very exciting, admittedly, but I'll be utilizing the train more often. At least for now. Oh, and back to the painting before I forget. When working traditionally, I generally use watercolor, gouache, or sometimes acrylics. For this painting, however, I'm only using gouache. And for those of you who may not be as familiar, gouache is essentially heavy body watercolor, which just means it's thick, and much more pigmented watercolor with a matte finish to boot, which I really like personally. I'm specifically using acrylic gouache. Now, the difference between regular gouache and acrylic gouache is that regular gouache you can reactivate with water, i.e., after it's dried, you can add water to it again and you can continue to move the pigment around to a degree. With acrylic gouache, on the other hand, once it is dried, it will not move anywhere, and for this reason, it makes it much easier to work over, which I'm particularly fond of. And on the topic of paint, I also wanted to talk about the importance of water-to-pigment ratio, which may kind of sound complicated, but I think it's really neat. Those of you who have painted before may have encountered the problem where your pigment either piles up or ends up looking streaky. Well, if your pigment is piling up, then you need to add more water, and if you're streaky, you need to add more pigment. Your paint should apply smoothly and easily, and I mention this because fighting with your medium adds so much unnecessary time to a piece. One way to test out your ratio is by placing a stroke of paint on a piece of plastic, like a plastic bag. It should stick but not clump up, and if it retracts into a bead of water and pigment, then you have too much water. Make your pigment work for you, not the other way around. Paint can be way too expensive to be a pain in the butt. Speaking of a pain in the butt, cooking. Sometimes, anyway. I've said before that I like cooking, and I do, but I haven't had a whole lot of time and or energy recently, so I've been making soup in the slow cooker. It's nice to just dump in your ingredients and let it do its thing while you're doing whatever else you like. Most recently, I made a soup with green peppers, onions, celery, spinach, and garlic, of course, for the main body of the soup, if you will. For the broth, I added some vegetable stock. I wanted the soup to be a bit creamier though, so I also added in some milk. Almond milk, for those curious, by the way, because it lasts so much longer in the fridge. I get the unsweetened vanilla because I just like vanilla, but the sweetened is just a bit too much for me. I also put in some butter and some grated Parmesan and Romano cheese. Overall, I think it came out pretty good. It's very nice with some nice toasted bread. I also made some peanut butter cookies that I really need to stop eating or I'm going to die. But aside from the junk food, I also got some odds and ends to help spice up my sandwiches that I usually make for lunch. Generally, I have like a turkey sandwich with mayonnaise and cheese or something, but I also got some carrots that I could shred into the sandwich, and some scallions and cilantro. If you haven't tried before, I highly recommend. It adds like an extra little kick to the sandwich, makes you feel healthy because you're eating your greens. Just good texture, good stuff. I think I'm hungry. Maybe I'm just hungry. I'll stop. I was matting and framing a painting of mine yesterday. I didn't have one of those fancy X-Acto knife / rulers, but I did have an X-Acto knife and a ruler separately, and a cutting board. That is very important in this equation. You don't want to cut up your table, or your floor in my case, because I didn't want to take the time to move all of my stuff off my desk. Anyway, very in character for me. I had this painting that was about 9 by 11.5 inches, let's say, which is not a standard frame size because I try to make things as hard for myself as possible. Anyway, it ended up that I would have some extra space to the right side of the painting. So what I did to fill in that space was I cut out another long rectangle and put in a blue gradient bar by the painting, which, by the way, this painting was also mostly blue, so it wasn't just a random blue. It fit in with the theme. Anyway, I felt I did some good problem solving, and overall I'm very happy with how it came out. Like I said, if it works, it works. Now, I believe it's about this time that we're getting towards the end of this video. I hope you liked our first traditional painting here on this channel, something small, something chill, and as an extra little something, here's some complimentary tape noises. Thank you so much for watching.